The recent massive strikes by the United States of America and Israel on Iran and the elimination of Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei are not just another escalation. This is a genuine geopolitical earthquake. Modern Iran has never seen this level of direct intervention. If the Ayatollah's regime collapses completely, the shockwave will be felt by absolutely all major powers. What awaits us? A market crash and oil at $30 to $40 a barrel? The largest civil war of the 21st century in a territory packed with missiles and nuclear technology? Mass migration and the redrawing of borders, where neighbors quietly begin to bite off pieces of the weakening giant? Or the absolute triumph of the Arab monarchies of the Persian Gulf, who will finally get rid of their main existential enemy, only to immediately start a new Cold War among themselves for the throne of the Middle East? One thing is certain: the fall of Iran will permanently redraw the map of the Middle East. And today, we will break down the scenarios of exactly how this colossus might collapse, who will divide its legacy, and how it will hit each of us. To understand the scale of the problem, you must grasp one thing. Iran is not an artificial country with randomly drawn borders. It is a 3,000-year-old imperial brand. Persians have dominated here for millennia. Their empire stretched from India to Europe. They survived the campaigns of Alexander the Great and were reborn as the mighty Sasanian Empire. Even in the 7th century, when the massive Arab conquest occurred, the empire did not dissolve. Persian culture proved so strong that it adopted Islam but effectively digested the conquerors to suit itself, preserving its unique identity. And in the 16th century, under the Safavid Empire, the most important event occurred. Shia Islam became the official religion of Iran. That was exactly when concrete was poured into the foundation of that very centuries-old geopolitical confrontation with Sunni Arab countries, which still blazes today. Therefore, modern Iran, with its 92 million people, an ocean of oil, and an army of proxy groups, looks at the Middle East exclusively as its historical domain. And quietly pulling this brick out of the region's foundation simply won't work. "92 million people. For comparison, this is more than the populations of Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, Qatar, Kuwait, and Bahrain combined. At first glance, such scale is a colossal demographic steamroller and an undeniable foundation for regional hegemony. But in moments of political instability, this very number turns into Iran's primary vulnerability. The fact is that Iran is not a monolith, but a complex patchwork quilt. Persians themselves make up just over 60% there. The remaining tens of millions are large, historically ambitious ethnic groups. Kurds, Baluch, a huge diaspora of Azerbaijanis, and, what is especially important in the context of the Middle East, Arabs. Arabs live compactly in the southwest, in the Khuzestan province. And that is exactly where the lion's share of all Iranian oil is concentrated. In the 1980s, Saddam Hussein already tried to break off this wealthiest piece, which resulted in a bloody 8-year war. If the central authority in Tehran collapses, the risk of internal division and a parade of sovereignties will increase manifold. For the Arab Gulf monarchies, this might seem like a historical chance, an opportunity to finance loyal forces and pull oil-bearing Khuzestan into their orbit of influence, permanently cutting Tehran off from its main source of income. But the problem is that such a collapse is extremely difficult to control. Theoretically, the fragmentation of Iran could trigger a chain reaction across the entire region. The Kurdish independence movement could seriously destabilize Iraq, Syria, and Turkey. Baluch unrest risks spilling over into nuclear-armed Pakistan. And the Azerbaijani factor will inevitably attract the attention of Baku and Ankara. Therefore, the scenario of ethnic disintegration is a double-edged sword. In an effort to weaken their main geopolitical competitor, Arab countries risk getting a colossal zone of instability right on their borders, which will force absolutely all neighbors to urgently revise their security strategies. But the paradox is that absolutely no one is interested in the actual territorial collapse of Iran. Neither Washington nor the Arab sheikhs. Topple the Ayatollah's regime, yes. But tearing a 92 million strong country into pieces means voluntarily opening Pandora's box. For the United States of America and Israel, complete state chaos means that Iranian nuclear facilities will be left without control. Enriched uranium, secret technologies, and ballistic missiles will instantly leak onto the black market, right into the hands of radical groups around the world. This is absolutely the worst possible scenario. But even if the regime change in Tehran follows the most careful scenario, and the country does not fall apart, the Middle East will face another colossal problem. What will happen in that very second to the so-called axis of resistance, a gigantic, heavily armed network of Iranian proxies across the region? Many optimists think that if you cut off the Hydra's head in Tehran, the tentacles will simply fall off on their own. Not a chance. For decades, Iran has been the main sponsor, ATM, and arms dealer for a whole scattering of groups. These are tens of thousands of heavily armed militants. Hezbollah in Lebanon, which de facto owns the southern part of the country. The Houthis in Yemen, terrorizing global trade in the Red Sea. Powerful Shia militias in Iraq and Syria. All of them are used to a steady stream of suitcases filled with cash and smuggled missiles. And suddenly, this tap is abruptly shut off. What will these people do? The option to lay down arms and go work in an office is not considered in the Middle East. Left without the Iranian leash and funding, these groups will turn into heavily armed orphans. And for the neighbors, this is one of the worst-case scenarios. To survive, pay militant salaries, and retain power in their territories, these organizations will inevitably start looking for new sources of income. Political and religious movements risk finally transforming into giant criminal cartels. A brutal struggle will begin for control over ports, smuggling, racketeering of local businesses, and simple blackmail of neighboring states in the style of, "Pay us or we will burn down your oil rigs." For Israel, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates, the disappearance of the Iranian threat may result in them having dozens of hungry, uncontrollable gangs on their borders, ready to sell their services to anyone, instead of one predictable enemy with a state mindset. But let's talk about the main lever of world control: money and resources. A scenario where the Ayatollah's regime falls and Iran opens its economy and gets rid of sanctions sounds like a fairy tale for the West. But for the global oil market, it is an absolute economic tsunami. The fact is that Iran is a sleeping energy titan, consistently ranking third or fourth in the world in proven oil reserves, holding more than 150 billion barrels, and second in gas reserves. Currently, due to harsh sanctions, Tehran is forced to trade its main wealth literally under the table. They use a huge shadow fleet of tankers and sell about 3 to 3.5 million barrels a day at a colossal discount, giving away oil for a pittance mainly to China. But if the new government opens the doors to Western investments and technologies, this valve will blow. The new government will need hundreds of billions to rebuild the country, and they will start pumping oil at maximum capacity, easily bringing exports to 4 to 5 million barrels a day. The global market will instantly choke on an oversupply of legal, unrestricted raw materials, which will inevitably provoke a price war. As a result, quotes could easily break the bottom, crashing to $30 to $40 a barrel. And here geopolitics performs an amazing somersault, because such an oil flood will become a real death sentence for countries whose budgets are tightly addicted to raw material exports. And first of all, for Russia. Moscow is currently critically dependent on high energy prices to finance its protracted war in Ukraine and support its domestic economy under the weight of its own sanctions. Oil at $30 to $40 a barrel will punch a hole in the Russian budget of such proportions that the Kremlin will simply have nothing left to continue hostilities. Moreover, with the fall of the current Iranian regime, Russia will lose its ally overnight. Without steady supplies of Shahed kamikaze drones and ballistic missiles from Tehran, the Russian military machine will have nothing left to hope for but the quality of North Korean shells. A wicked geopolitical irony arises. A change of power in the Middle East could become the most powerful factor that dramatically accelerates the end of the war in Eastern Europe. The paradox is that ultimately, it might not be Western sanctions, but Iranian protesters who deprive the Kremlin of its financial fuel and key weapons. The bottom line is that the fall of Iran is not just a local Middle Eastern drama. It is a global reset of the entire world economy and security architecture. The scenarios can be absolutely polar. From a soft democratization that will turn the 92 million strong country into the most lucrative emerging market of the 21st century and bring down global inflation, to a bloody civil war and balkanization that will ignite the entire region and scatter nuclear technologies across black markets. But whatever path awaits this 3,000-year-old imperial colossus, one thing can be said for absolutely certain. The shockwave from its fall will be felt by everyone, from politicians in the high offices of Washington and Beijing, to ordinary drivers at gas stations and soldiers in trenches all over the world. Therefore, subscribe to the channel right now to follow this geopolitical thriller together. And be sure to write in the comments, which scenario do you consider the most realistic? Democracy, a loyal dictator, or complete chaos?